Under the golden light of the Roman sun, the city dazzled with its grandeur, marble temples towering like gifts to the gods, aqueducts carrying the lifeblood of the empire, and arenas echoing with the roar of the masses. To the outside world, this was the heart of civilization, unmatched in power, wealth, and sophistication. But history's most tantalizing truths rarely dwell in the open. Beneath the glittering veneer of civic pride and military glory lay a labyrinth of private indulgences, where the rules of morality bent and sometimes broke entirely. Behind locked villa doors, in candlelit chambers, and even amid the splendor of imperial banquets, desires flourished in ways that would make even the boldest blush. This was not merely lust, it was theater, politics, dominance, and sometimes a ritual that blurred the sacred and the profane. It was a playground where pleasure was currency, seduction a tool, and shame a foreign concept. Senators who delivered stern speeches by day might don masks and silks by night, while emperors whose faces adorned coins could be found orchestrating spectacles that defied both law and reason. The poets of the age, men like Juvenal and Martial, hinted at these worlds in coded verses, because even in Rome, where excess was a way of life, some truths were too dangerous to shout aloud, and so they whispered. But whispers, like water, find their way through cracks, and centuries later those whispers reach us, daring us to look closer. What truly happened behind those tall bronze gates, where perfumed air carried both the scent of roses and the heat of unrestrained passion? What secret games unfolded in the emperor's private gardens, and what unspeakable rites turned festivals into nights of wild abandon? Tonight, we will step into the shadows of Rome's most intimate history, not as prying voyeurs, but as seekers of truth, uncovering the bizarre, scandalous, and almost unbelievable practices that defined the private lives of the most powerful civilization on earth. From decadent feasts where pleasure was served alongside peacock tongues, to secret rooms where boundaries blurred beyond recognition, this journey will peel away the polished mask of Roman virtue and reveal the intoxicating and sometimes disturbing realities that thrived in its hidden heart. The question is not whether these acts occurred, but whether you're ready to see Rome as it truly was. From the closing years of the Roman Republic into the height of the Imperial era, a unique truth governed life in the Eternal City. Pleasure was not merely a personal indulgence, it was a public statement. Roman sexuality, unlike the stricter moral codes that would later dominate Europe, was shaped less by notions of sin and more by hierarchies of power, status, and control. To take pleasure was one thing, to command it was another. A senator's worth could be measured as much by the luxury of his entertainments as by the eloquence of his speeches, and an emperor's authority was often reinforced through displays of indulgence that reminded all who watched that he lived above the rules that bound lesser men. The public baths, for instance, were more than places to cleanse the body. They were centers of social exchange, political networking, and flirtation. In their steam-filled chambers, deals were struck, alliances forged, and passions quietly negotiated under the cover of casual conversation. Banquets were equally strategic, serving as stages for opulent performances, where exotic foods, rare wines, and sensual entertainment were woven into elaborate expressions of wealth and dominance. Roman poets understood this interplay between pleasure and power better than most. Ovid, in his Ars Amatoria, treated seduction almost like a martial art, teaching readers that love and conquest were closely related pursuits. Juvenal's biting satires painted vivid portraits of a society that celebrated extravagance while pretending to mourn its moral decline, exposing hypocrisies with razor-sharp wit. Martial's epigrams, short and potent, revealed the daily erotic games, teasing innuendo, and unashamed appetites that permeated urban life. These works weren't written to shock. They reflected a reality where desire was acknowledged openly, but always framed within the rigid social ladder that governed Rome. For the elite, The true indulgence wasn't simply in taking a lover or hosting a feast, but in ensuring that everyone knew their pleasures were finer, rarer, and more unattainable than anyone else's. In this culture, pleasure became its own economy, one where the wealthy spent lavishly and the rest of society could only watch, envy, and perhaps dream of tasting such forbidden luxuries. In Rome, the calendar itself was a tapestry woven with the threads of pleasure and excess, for there were days when the city surrendered its usual discipline and gave itself over to the demands of the gods. The Floralia, held in honor of the goddess Flora, transformed the streets each spring into a living celebration of fertility and renewal. Garlands of blossoms draped over marble columns, perfuming the air with the heady scent of new life. In open-air theaters, dancers performed in sheer garments, or none at all, while actors staged comedic plays laced with bawdy humor and unabashed eroticism. For the crowd, the festival was not simply about honoring Flora's bounty. It was an open invitation to embrace the sensuality of the season, to let inhibitions fall away like petals in the wind. What began as a religious observance often ended in private feasts and intimate encounters, the line between ritual and indulgence fading into irrelevance. If the Floralia was a celebration in full daylight, the Bacchanalia was its shadowed counterpart, a festival cloaked in secrecy and drenched in wine. Originally a rite imported from Greece in honor of Bacchus, god of wine and ecstasy, it began as small, sacred gatherings before growing into sprawling nocturnal assemblies where music throbbed like a heartbeat and masks hid the identities of participants. Under flickering torchlight, inhibitions dissolved in rivers of wine, and rumor painted these gatherings as scenes of unrestrained carnality and dangerous conspiracies. So notorious did the Bacchanalia become that the Roman Senate, fearing both moral decay and political subversion, moved to suppress them with harsh decrees, though whispers claimed they never truly vanished, only retreated into the hidden chambers of those powerful enough to defy the law. Then came Saturnalia, perhaps the most beloved of Roman festivals, when the social order itself was turned upside down. For a few days in midwinter, masters served their slaves, gambling was permitted, and formal togas were replaced with colorful party garments. Public banquets overflowed with food and drink, and in the spirit of equality, barriers between rank and class dissolved. But equality in Rome often came with a sensual undercurrent, and in the mingling of master and servant, of citizen and foreigner, opportunities for forbidden liaisons abounded. Whispers and glances became propositions, and the same streets that hosted torchlit parades also hid doorways, leading to quieter, more intimate celebration. In these festivals, Rome revealed a truth as old as the gods themselves. Joy was sacred, and when the divine called for pleasure, the people answered without restraint. Power in Rome was never simply about ruling armies or passing laws. It was about crafting an image of superiority as so absolute that no mortal dared to question it. Nowhere was this more evident than in the private indulgences of the emperors, where pleasure became a stage for political theatre. On the island of Capri, Emperor Tiberius withdrew from the capital to what he called his pleasure gardens, a retreat that, according to Suetonius, was a sanctuary of every imaginable excess. Here, away from the watchful eyes of the Senate, the aging ruler surrounded himself with performers trained in acts so obscene that they shocked even Rome's jaded elite. There were whispers, dark and disturbing, of children pressed into service, instructed in games meant to amuse a man who held the fate of the empire in his hands. Whether every rumor was true or not, the power of such stories lay in their persistence, painting Capri as a place where morality went to die and the emperor's will was law in its most intimate form. If Tiberius cloaked his pleasures in isolation, Caligula displayed his in the open with theatrical defiance. The young emperor turned the imperial palace into a carnival of unpredictability, where guests never knew whether they would be honored or humiliated. Historical accounts claim he would invite the wives of prominent senators to dine, only to lead them away mid-meal for private marriages that lasted the night. Some sources accused him of flaunting affairs with his own sisters, an act that blurred the boundaries between rumor, propaganda, and possible truth. Caligula's Rome was one where the emperor's appetite, whether for power or for flesh, became a living reminder that the empire itself existed to serve him body and soul. Then came Nero, whose banquets redefined excess into an art form. His feasts sprawled from evening into dawn, with courses served on dishes of gold, and fountains flowing with wine instead of water. But the real entertainment was not the food. It was the people. Musicians played as dancers, and actors performed scenes that often slipped into the erotic, blurring the line between theater and reality. Guests might find themselves unexpectedly swept into these performances, becoming part of the spectacle without choice or warning. Tacitus and other chroniclers described nights where the emperor roamed the gardens disguised, mingling with revelers, indulging in acts that shocked and delighted in equal measure. For these rulers, pleasure was never separate from politics. Both were tools to assert dominance, both games to be played without shame. To control desire and to show that no desire was beyond their reach was to remind Rome that the emperor's power was absolute and his whims were the pulse to which the empire beat. Beyond the public feasts, the roaring arenas, and the grand speeches in the forum, the private world of Rome's aristocracy unfolded in spaces meant to impress yet conceal. Step inside a patrician villa and you might first be struck by the scale columns of gleaming marble, mosaic floors depicting myths and legends, and courtyards fragrant with imported flowers. But behind the beauty lay chambers where status was reinforced through the possession of people, not just property. Sexual slavery was an accepted part of elite life, with concubines and attendants chosen as much for their appearance as their ability to entertain and obey. For the wealthy, these arrangements were not considered scandalous, they were simply a reflection of power. A nobleman might display his most attractive servants, as one might exhibit fine silverware, objects of desire, and proof of fortune. Women of rank, though less openly, could also command such indulgences, arranging liaisons under the protection of their household's privacy. Entertainment in these spaces often drew upon the exotic. Rome's vast empire brought performers from Egypt, Syria, and beyond, offering dances, music, and displays designed to stir both curiosity and temptation. Some acts were purely aesthetic, but others leaned toward the provocative, merging art with seduction. Draped in silks, moving to rhythms unfamiliar to Roman ears, these entertainers embodied the allure of the foreign, something dangerous yet irresistible. Such performances might conclude with private invitations extended to select guests, ensuring the night's pleasures lingered long after the music faded. The walls themselves bore witness to these indulgences, decorated with frescoes and mosaics, depicting acts that today would be considered explicit. Nowhere is this more famously preserved than in Pompeii, where buried villas have revealed a stunning array of erotic imagery scenes, not hidden in shame, but displayed as decoration, woven seamlessly into the fabric of daily life. Archaeological digs have also uncovered objects whose shapes and purposes leave little doubt about their intent. Carved figurines, ornate phallic amulets, and devices hinting at fetishes rarely spoken of in polite company. In the privacy of these opulent chambers, every appetite could be catered to, every fantasy explored. Behind each marble column there might indeed be a secret, a taste, a craving, a game that belonged entirely to those wealthy enough to afford it and powerful enough to protect it. Beneath Rome's glittering image of sophistication and refinement, there pulsed a darker current where pleasure crossed into cruelty and desire became a tool of exploitation. Slaves, stripped not only of freedom but of the right to refuse, were at the mercy of their master's whim. In the private chambers of patrician villas, bodies were commodities, traded and used without consequence. Gladiators, admired for their strength and skill in the arena, were not spared this fate. To the elite, these fighters were living trophies, objects of lust as much as entertainment. A victorious gladiator might leave the Colosseum to the roar of the crowd only to find himself commanded to another kind of performance in a patron's home. The imbalance of power meant consent was irrelevant. Such encounters were less about intimacy and more about ownership, an assertion that the mighty of Rome could claim any body they desired. Layered atop these grim realities were Rome's more unsettling fascinations, myths and rumors of unions between humans and animals. Some of these stories were symbolic, drawn from the empire's vast tapestry of mythology, where gods often took animal forms to seduce mortals, but others hinted at disturbing entertainment staged in the shadows, designed to shock, provoke, or sate the perverse curiosities of those whose wealth insulated them from moral restraint. The line between story and fact is blurred in the surviving accounts, but the persistence of such tales suggests they were more than mere invention. Then there were the risks people willingly embraced in the pursuit of passion. Dangerous aphrodisiacs, brewed from exotic plants and potent minerals, promised heightened pleasure but could bring illness, madness, or death. Fertility rituals, sometimes involving elaborate and hazardous physical acts, were carried out in hopes of pleasing the gods and securing heirs. Roman lawmakers occasionally tried to rein in the excess, passing decrees to limit certain festivals or ban the more scandalous gatherings. Yet these laws rarely succeeded. Pleasure, once woven into the fabric of society, was not easily unraveled. For every indulgence Rome embraced, there was a cost. One that might strip you of your dignity, your health, your freedom, or in the most perilous cases, your life. As centuries passed, the excesses that had once been flaunted as proof of Rome's grandeur began to sour in the public mind. Philosophers like Seneca, writing under the early empire, condemned the moral decay they believed indulgence had bred, warning that a society drunk on pleasure was a society steering toward ruin. To him, the endless banquets, the public displays of lust, the private vices of the elite were not harmless amusements, but signs of a deeper weakness corroding the Roman spirit. His words found eager ears among those who sought to present themselves as moral reformers, and over time such critiques became weapons in the political arena. Enemies accused rivals of sexual deviance, real or imagined, knowing that in the court of public opinion, scandal could be as deadly as the sword. What had once been a mark of power, lavish displays of sensual dominance, could now be twisted into an accusation of decadence unfit for leadership. The rise of Christianity sharpened this shift. In the faith's earliest centuries, its leaders contrasted their vision of modesty, chastity, and spiritual purity with the perceived corruption of the pagan world. Sexual indulgence, once a public celebration of life and status, was reframed as a moral failing, a dangerous distraction from divine truth. As the Christian message spread, the colorful festivals of old, with their erotic plays and uninhibited revelry, began to be denounced as sinful remnants of a doomed era. By the time Christianity rose to imperial prominence in the 4th century, the transformation was complete. The pleasures of Rome's golden age had been recast as evidence of its decline, its fall seen not merely as a political collapse, but as divine judgment. What once had been a language of power became a record of shame, and the empire's sensual legacy, its games, its banquets, its whispered intrigues, was left to the shadows, remembered not as triumphs of human appetite, but as sins that had summoned its end. Today, the sexual world of ancient Rome lives on less in marble and stone than in the stories we continue to tell about it. From the sweeping spectacles of epic films to the intimate intrigues of novels and television dramas, the empire's reputation for decadence has become part of its enduring allure. Directors recreate the glittering banquets, the candlelit chambers, the masked festivals, not merely to shock, but to immerse audiences in a civilization where desire and power moved in lockstep. Historians too sift through surviving texts, frescoes and artifacts, piecing together a picture that is at once glamorous and unsettling. Yet for all the vivid details we inherit from poets like Ovid and satirists like Juvenal, much of Rome's private life remains obscured, shaped by rumor, political bias, and the moral judgments of later ages. This makes our fascination with it even stronger, because in every surviving detail lies the possibility that there is more we don't yet know. But to understand this world is to tread carefully. Judging Rome's pleasures through the lens of modern morality risks flattening its complexity into caricature. What we see as decadence, the Romans may have seen as ritual, celebration, or simply the natural privileges of rank. At the same time, to romanticize their excesses is to ignore the exploitation, inequality, and dangers woven into them. The truth, as always in history, is tangled, a mixture of beauty and brutality, liberation and control. And so the empire's sensual legacy continues to haunt us, not because it offers easy lessons, but because it challenges our assumptions about human desire, power, and the thin line between the two. Rome has fallen, its streets silenced, and its palaces in ruins, yet its secrets still breathe in the dust. They whisper to us across millennia, daring us to decide whether they are warnings or temptation. So now you've seen the Rome that marble statues never show, the feasts behind closed doors, the festivals where the gods were honored with abandon, the chambers where desire was both a pleasure and a weapon. You've walked through gardens where emperors blurred the line between politics and passion, peered into villas where wealth could buy any fantasy, and stepped into shadows where the cost of pleasure might be your dignity, your freedom, or your life. But history's greatest provocations are not just in what happened, they're in the questions they leave us. If you lived in Rome, would you have surrendered to the intoxicating swirl of its indulgences, joining in the games that defined the powerful? Or would you have turned away, resisting temptation even as the city around you celebrated it openly? And if the record of your life were left to your enemies, as so much of Rome's history was, whose version of your story would survive, the one you lived or the one they wanted the world to believe? This empire has long since fallen, its streets reduced to ruins, yet the echoes of its private world still call to us. They invite us to imagine, to question, to uncover the truths that history half buried in shame and half preserved in fascination. If you want to keep exploring the forbidden corners of the ancient world, the hidden festivals, the scandalous rulers, the whispered intrigues that shaped civilizations, make sure you subscribe. Tell me in the comments, which Roman scandal shocked you the most? Share this with someone who thinks they know Rome and let them see the empire as it truly was. Brilliant, brutal, and utterly human. The past is never as distant as it seems, and some secrets refuse to stay buried.